Hi guys. Thanks for joining. So we are here. We're just going to wait for another minute or two, just to let other people join, and before we kick start. So just bear with us for probably another minute or two. And but thanks for coming though. We'd love to, of course. I'm sure you will enjoy the whole webinar today and learn a lot. So more people are coming. So I'm just we won't start it, but just to add some we'll keep it as interactive as possible. So we'll be asking quite a few questions. I will be asking quite a few questions to our fantastic speakers. But please also, if you can write your questions, there is an option there to write your questions, and I will take it as we go along. We have a separate question and answer session at the end. And I will again repeat the same thing when other people are joined, but please keep writing and just try to make it as engaging as possible and try to get most out of these speakers while we're here. We don't normally see these fantastic speakers one place that often. So please do write as many questions as you can, and I will take as many questions as we can as well. So just wait for probably another 30 seconds. We kick start. Great. Okay, I'm going to start now. So before I jump in and just tell a bit about myself, so quick housekeeping. We are recording this webinar. We will be sharing it as on demand. So you don't have to really take notes, but please do if you want to. But also, if you can, any question you have, please do ask. There is an option there to ask questions, and I will be taking those questions. So just introduction about us and me. So my name is Adnan Zahir. I'm Chief Exec of iCustoms. We are a technology company, trade compliance, and we are automating the trade compliance. We brought some really cool, fantastic technologies and making people's life easier in the trade compliance point of view, saving them hell of a time, and of course, increasing the accuracy. I'm not going to talk too much about us. It's not about iCustoms. It's really about our speakers and what they have to say about the future of trade compliance and how the technology is really helping this industry. And without further ado, I'm just going to pass on to our speakers just to introduce themselves, a couple of minutes telling a bit about themselves, about their experience and so. So I will start from Lars, and then if Walter and then Mark can introduce themselves, and we can jump onto the question afterwards. Lars, please.
Thank you very much, Adnan, and thank you for the invitation to come here and speak with my colleagues and, of course, all the people around for this very timely webinar. I think we live in very interesting times, and there is a big need for these type of events to actually sharing and start doing things around what we see around us. So I'm Lars Karlsson. I'm the global head of trade and customs consulting in AP Møller Maersk, very well-known ocean shipping company. It's been around for 100+ years. We are in a big transformation ourselves. We are moving from being an ocean container shipper to an integrator of trade, end-to-end solutions, all transport mode, and trying to do that through digitalization. And of course, that is necessary, right? Because we know that we live in a world with trade wars, with conflicts, with container ships stuck in the sand, and with a post-pandemic world that we see there has been more than 7,000 trade barriers raised the last 10 years. And at the same time, we know that trade is a driver for development, for growth, for poverty reduction, and all the good things that we all need, specifically in times like this. What we have seen, though, is that the good news is that it has been an acceleration of digitalization. And I say digitalization because it's not digitization of actually making all these paper documents that are still in international trade, making them electronic only, but it's also about actually changing the processing and making the international supply and value chains supported by data pipelining. Of course, that's the good news, that there's an acceleration. The bad news, Adnan, is that it's going too slow. So we need to start doing things about how can we accelerate and how can we do it quicker. And we in Maersk are certainly, as I said, a part of that, and we are trying to drive our industry and trying to drive international trade as much as possible. So I'll stop there as introduction. Looking forward for this discussion and this panel today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lars. Very, very, very impressive. Of course, your background is. Walter, do you want to please introduce yourself and a bit about your experience?
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Walter van der Meer. I work for UPS, and also I do come from a company that exists for now 116 years, United Parcel Service, which provides very integrated services where customs clearance is really key to our success. And customs clearance today is, of course, not possible without very, very integrated IT systems. I am active within the European Union, working with the European Commission, DG Taxud, on customs legislation. I'm responsible for trade and compliance within UPS. I'm the chairperson of the AmCham EU committee, and I'm part of the European Express Association as well. And in that function, I'm exposed to a lot of new projects, current projects, IT projects that deploy IT in order to make customs legislation work. And that is pretty exciting, certainly because we live into transformative times. And actually, I've been into the business since the last century, 1984. And when I entered into the customs brokerage, I witnessed the first technological disruption, which was the replacement from the telex by the fax machine. Now, we are a bit further. Now we're talking about predictive service, artificial intelligence, and without that, we are not able anymore to tackle the challenges we have today. As Lars already referred to, we are seeing a lot of more restrictions. We have a need for more, earlier, and better data availability. And that is only possible when we use the technology of today and tomorrow. Otherwise, and I'll probably give a couple of examples later on in this webinar, otherwise we are going to fail, and that's going to, we're going to end up with a competitive disadvantage.
Very, very impressive. Very impressive. Thanks, Walter. Mark, would you please tell a bit about yourself?
Yep, Walter, you don't look old enough. So Mark Denney, so thanks for the invitation also, Adnan. It's really good to be here. Mine's a different history. So, you know, my history is 20 years of banking experience, so mainly in corporate banking, investment banking, payments. And that really was a bit of a springboard for taking a job within HMRC. I fancied a change in focus from a cultural perspective and also from a technology point of view as well. I landed into HMRC at the end of 2019. Some say I was lucky, some would say I was very, very unlucky, but what I faced going into that job was a huge transformation. COVID kicked off within about 3 months, and then we had Brexit to do as well, and we managed to deliver the whole lot, but it was very stressful at the time. Since then, I've been working as an IT business advisor to a number of small companies. And why am I here today? By leading that HMRC Brexit readiness effort, I gained a lot of experience and a lot of understanding of the trade policy and compliance at the border and its limitations. So it's given me that ability to kind of stand back and think about what we need technically to play into that technology that's deployed currently. For my sins as well, I also picked up the single trade window for the government about a month before I left. So I have some insights into that as well, which I'm sure will be part of the conversation. I know Lars has been interested in that too. So back to you, Adnan, for now.
Thanks a lot. That's again very, very impressive, of course, background you have. And so in terms of a couple of questions before, so someone can't see Lars, hopefully they can see now. And yes, this session is recorded. Just to say it again, please do write your questions. We'll be taking your questions. It's all about, as much as questions you want to ask, please do, and we will take your questions. This is a good opportunity to learn some first-hand kind of knowledge about not only the trade compliance changes and how technology is changing the world. The next round, the next session is really about the questions. So I have a few questions I'm going to ask speakers, and then and of course I will be taking more from you guys as well, from the attendees. So my first question is from Lars, and Lars, the first question is about what are the 3 most important things to accelerate trade and custom digitalizations?
No, of course, that's the million-dollar question, right? Because as I said before, we need to accelerate. And I also been around, I know you can't see that either, but my first job, the only job I ever applied for was in Swedish Customs in 1984. And I actually got in and started working on the digitalization side, where we did the first electronic signatures, the first EDI, first going to 99% paperless and all of that in Swedish Customs. And from that, a number of other concepts like the authorized economic operator programs, the single trade window, first in the world, Mark, and then been involved in like 25 single trade windows around the world through that career, which also ended up with 6 years as director of World Customs Organization. So what would be the 3 most important things, to be clear? Well, I think there are 3 elements that needs to be really addressed to make it accelerated. The first one is standardization. And having worked in the World Customs Organization, standardizing at least customs and borders, then you will know that this is a slow process. It's a long process. Walter knows as well, I always say I'm married to the same woman after 34 years because I spent more time with the European Commission than with her. And that might be true or not true, but it's a long process to do standardization. And I think we need to rethink. I think we need to innovate also the standardization piece, meaning that we need to be more agile. We need to do framework agreements, standardization instead, and we need to pilot those framework agreements saying, what are we really needing to do to exchange data? How do we do it? And then leave it to the industry to basically take care of how that is done and what systems are used and so forth. The second element is, of course, government or international institutions, cooperation with business and private sector. It needs to be absolutely much more integrated. We need to work much closer together. There needs to be a different arenas to do that. UK government has just done the ecosystem of trust pilots. It's under evaluation right now, where a number of, including ourselves, we've been involved in 2 of these pilots. And we have been investing for a year together with our clients. There are 15, 20 companies involved in our consortiums doing this together with the agencies of UK government. And we are doing it for free. We are basically doing it to evolve the digitalization side and see how already existing government systems can work with industry system standards that are already there. And then on top of that, build a framework of how can this be done to scale it so it's open for everyone. And the third thing is basically we need killer applications, right? We need a number of really good examples that will drive this process quicker than it does today. And to do that, we also need to have benefits, right? So governments need to start looking into those who actually have compliance, trade compliance, have a possibility to submit supply chain data or other types of data that can help the compliance and risk management process at borders with governments, also needs to get something back. There need to be then a more trusted trade compliant process using trade compliance and compliance records of companies to actually speed up and make it simpler, easier, more sustainable, more resilient, and more predictable at borders, because that will drive the process really quickly. And I think that examples finally around like the electronic, the digital bills of lading, these type of things, we need just to scale it up, test these type of things together, and do it in cooperation.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's very, very impressive. I think especially around the collaboration and the digitalization you just mentioned. Walter, I have a question with you now, especially focusing on the European Union. And how does the custom IT environment within the EU looks like?
Thank you for that question, and that I think that illustrates a bit what Lars has been saying, because actually the points that he referred to have been lacking for the moment. And what I would say is let's learn from our mistakes here, because you have to understand the background. The European Union has 27 member states. It has 27 IT systems, which makes it very complicated to implement legislation. We have the Union Customs Code that has been adopted in 2013, implemented in 2016, but they have an Article 278 that provided transitional measures as long as not all the IT systems were in place. That Article 278 that said that by 31st of December 2020, all systems, including centralized clearance, which was kind of the very nice to have for industry, that should have been in place by 31st of December 2020. In 2019, the Commission came to the conclusion that that was not realistic anymore. There was no more money. It was too complex. So they extended the deadline to 31st of December 2025. Now, that means that legislation that you conceived in, let's say, 2005, 2010, needs to be implemented over a range of 10, 15 years. We are now 2023, and we are halfway. So that article hasn't been extended until the 31st of December 2025, but we already see also now this year that there are a lot of member states that are not going to be able to stick to the timeline. So we drastically need the European Commission to come back to the table and to see what is possible, because honestly, and without being critical, but they are not using today's technology anymore, and I think that's what we need. We need to come up with solutions for today's and tomorrow's business reality using today's and tomorrow's technology.
Yeah, the very interesting point, especially around some of the industries, and of course the regulators are a bit behind the use of technology. So we're very well aware of that, I guess, as an industry. My next question is to you. And so, as you mentioned, you were a CIO at HMRC during Brexit. And what was that like? And on reflection, how fit for purpose are the current government policies and technology?
That's a good question. So obviously I'm going to be talking about the UK and nothing else. So, you know, it was a huge amount of work. Obviously, there was a lot of people involved, you know, outside of government as well as inside of government. I think everyone's got to remember that it is a huge cross-government effort when it comes to these things. You know, HMRC definitely had the lion's share of the work, but you are working in tandem with other government departments at the same time. Hugely political. So, you know, it was going to be a hard Brexit, then it was going to be a negotiated Brexit, then it was going to be a hard Brexit again. And each time that went back and forward, the requirements on HMRC and the government departments would completely change, right? So it was very, very difficult to tie down what the solutions would be in enough time to do something meaningful, to build, you know, solutions that potentially people would have been more proud of. Because the truth of it is, what's being deployed at the border for compliance in the UK is probably not fit for purpose, and I think the government realises this and is moving upon it. You know, things like what Lars was mentioning, trusted trader schemes, things like the single trade window, and other initiatives that are being pushed by the government now are in response to the fact that, you know, what we've got at the border is very legacy from a policy perspective. And it's also very legacy in the main from a technology point of view as well. Some of the systems that were deployed were over 30 years old.
Wow.
There was some newer systems, but there were some pretty old systems in there too. So, you know, what I would say is, you know, due to the changing and, you know, the proverbial moving target, what has been deployed definitely is subpar, and probably isn't fit for purpose in the longer term, which is why the UK government is moving quite quickly now to try and rearrange other compliance, you know, policy and technologies at the border. That's where I'll probably summarise it.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, I think it's a great summary, really. Now, just taking from Europe to UK and I'm going back to the global side of it. And my next question is with Lars. So there's a lot of things happening in global trade right now. So how often so you often talk about global trade 2.0. What is your definition of that? What is it?
Yeah, global trade, the 2.0 or 2.0 is really the new generation of international trade that we're starting emerging to see, right? And what does it then mean? Well, what it means is that we know today that 70% of all goods going through, and as you know, Maersk is the biggest mover of goods in the world, right? So, but it's also our industry overall and the other industries and Walter's industry as well. We see this, that what's happening is that 70% is moving in integrated value chains. These integrated value chains, you can have a border crossing 4 or 5 times already during a production cycle. So people are producing everywhere, selling everywhere, and it's moving many times, much more complicated ways than we've seen in the past. And obviously, this was really what we saw during the pandemic as well, and during the last couple of years when we saw the issues around supply chain resilience, delays at borders. And what we then discovered, and there's a lot of studies around this, that there was, of course, a number of ripple effects and a number of reasons why there were delays and why we got into this, say, disharmony of the system where containers, as an example, was not at the place they should be. So the new global trade 2.0 is really about moving to a different set of how we actually do this. Because, again, as an example, more than 20% of the delays during the pandemic was actually not due to not having drivers at the ports or not having space in containers. It was actually due to bad customs planning. So people didn't know on trade compliance what they actually want to do. And then, of course, when the windows for moving cross borders became tighter and there were queues and so forth, then it added on to the problems they had with actually not having trade compliance in how they actually did the border crossings. So Global Trade 2.0 is about using the data we already have in the supply chain. It's huge amounts of data there. There's structured data. The customs data, as an example, is already standardized since many years. And of course, we need to start use and reuse that by connecting already industry systems that are there together with government systems to make the trade flows work better. And that we can do in 3 ways, right? First is that we need to get these integrated value chains and supply chains supported by digital pipelines, trusted ways, different ways of doing that, and start reusing the export from Korea to the import in UK and all the way through knowing the data and the data pipeline to be able to do those moments. We actually do this many times during that journey so people can move their goods in an integrated way, and that's what we are about to do as well. Second part of that is, of course, that we also need to get the connectivity then to work better than it is today. So there needs to be an exchange of data, but again, as examples where we tested in this ecosystem of Trustpilot now in UK, many of the players, including ourselves, has track and trace in our containers today, which means that there's already 24/7 check on containers. If a container from Australia to UK has already been veterinary controlled, and there's a number of other controls done, then it's totally monitored and could be managed by border force or HMRC all the way through, just by having access to our systems, which our customers also have. So start using those trade compliance. Mark was talking about the complicated systems of around Brexit for HMRC and border force. There is 20-25 years of trade compliance data in your systems, in your databases. And of course, those could be used to actually enhance together with new supply chain data coming in voluntarily. And that brings us to the final element, which is trust, right? So we need to start looking into the trust of the supply chain. And if we can get the different systems. I was working on the authorized economic operator programs around the world. I've been involved in 55, 60 of them, and also the standard setting in World Customs Organization. There's more than 100,000 companies that are AOs in the world. And of course, we can connect that and those stakeholders, transporters, terminals, free ports. There's a big discussion around right now going on with actually getting our, the high level segmentation of risk and compliance lines into free ports, free zones, bonded warehousing. And by that, you can actually have the transparency that customs administration and border agencies need to have, and you get then security into those nodes in the supply chain as well. And if goods is moving through those nodes, through those transporters, those freight forwarders, using those brokers or whoever it is in the supply chain, then of course it's much easier for border agencies to do their job in a proper way for all of us as citizens. So Global Trade 2.0, we start using what we already have. We are innovating by actually connecting those and then making sure that we can exchange data in a safe and secure way, and doing that as much as possible so we actually can speed up this international cooperation and do what Walter was saying, not waiting 10, 15 years to hope that there's legislation going to be implemented so we can start using centralized clearance in the European Union. But we need to go ahead of that, and those who are willing to do that in private sector and in government and in the European Union will have to be able to do that to actually show the example and test and show how it works in the real world.
Yeah. Okay. Now, very, very interesting. Again, it's keep coming back to this. I'm hearing the same messages around the digitalization and collaboration, and those messages I keep getting the conversation we had so far. It's great. So my next question is from Walter, and it's going to go back again to EU. And Walter, you did talk about the EU and the IT environment there. So what is the current status now? And what are the challenges the customs and industry are facing?
Thanks for the question. The EU has realized that they need to change their course, because they do realize that what the UCC intended to be, the Union Customs Code, was to increase the capabilities, the efficiency of governments in terms of risk assessment, in terms of revenue collection. They see that that is not effective, and to that end, they held a foresight exercise between EU customs authorities, but other departments of the Commission, people from university, people from trade. I was happy to be part of that foresight exercise. And that exercise looked at 4 scenarios and basically had to determine how will EU customs look in 2040. And based on that result, we would go back decremental in phases of 5 years to determine what needs to happen to become that EU customs or that EU customs union in 2040. The result of that was basically EU customs has to talk with one voice. Based on that, the EU Commission then got a wise persons group in that also had to see what had to change of the customs union. The wise persons group was part trade representatives, part governmental officials, very skilled and efficient persons. And the wise persons group looked at different aspects of the customs reality within the EU, and I'm going to quote them on data and IT. They said, despite considerable efforts by the Commission and the Member States, customs systems are still mostly used to make more effective a traditional approach to customs clearance. Data currently used is declarative, often flawed, not easily cross-validated against other data sources, sometimes inconsistently shared, and not available when required to all parts of the system. And to that end, they recommended a new data approach. Customs data needs to come from business systems of automated or authorized economic operators, be based on underlying commercial data. Other data needs to be gathered from other sources like platforms and payment systems, and that's obvious if you look at the e-commerce reality of today, to cross-check anomalies for risk assessment using, for instance, blockchain when appropriate. Data will be integrated on common shared systems so that all member states customs can access, and it needs to produce economies of scale for custom services and more effective, less variation. So that were the conclusions of the Wise Persons Group. European Commission now has taken these recommendations and is preparing new customs legislation. Customs legislation that will be presented most likely next week, and that will replace the current legislation, and that is considered to be the biggest change in European Union customs legislation ever. So we are very interested to see what's that going to bring, and if there's time, I can give you a bit more insights to this, but I'm going to leave it with this for the moment.
And of course, I'm sure our listener would love to know a bit more about that. But let's see if we have more time. I'm sure we'll find some time now. But before we jump into the next question, again for the audience, please do ask the question. I will be taking the question shortly. Please keep writing your questions. Yeah, we'll take that shortly. My next question is with Mark, and again coming back, focusing again on the technology side. So how can technology be applied to help improve trade flow and reduce the burden of bureaucracy?
Yeah, I mean, what Walter and Lars are describing, let's call it Trade 2.0, is going to be heavily technology driven. It's going to be a data question, and it's going to be an application of technology, there's no question. And it's going to be very intelligent technology in the longer term that's required to make it truly slick. One comment on that is, knowing and working within that kind of civil service, UK government sphere, it's going to require a real jump in terms of understanding of data, how they manage data, and how they use it in a more profound way to kind of service what needs to be done at the border. So there's going to be a lot of political challenges and a lot of kind of dragging and screaming to get people to kind of face up to what Trade 2.0 needs to be in the future. But let me bring it right back to today, right? When we're going out there and we're talking to freight forwarders and we're talking to traders, the key things that people say is it's just super complicated, and what that really means is to them is increased cost. So costs have gone through the roof. They're really struggling to hire enough staff to be able to service. It's quite crippling for some of the organizations that we spoke to. They talk about this, huge increase in bureaucracy that people are facing, and the complication which is basically inherent in that bureaucracy. It's very hard to get it right. Things that were cited were, document management is a problem. Things like just simple stuff, really, like getting the right commodity codes, and things like that, like quite simple things. GVMS was another one that was basically pulled out as being something very complicated. And what this all does is it basically increases those costs, and it leads to delays potentially at the EU and UK border ports, which again is obviously a problem. So I think what we've got to do in the short to medium term is we've got to try and provide some relief to this community. And I think we've got to be intelligent how we try to target that relief to remove some of that bureaucracy and remove some of that cost that people are facing. Simple solutions around document management, things that can look up very cleverly, classification codes, rules engines that basically deal with error messaging, which when I worked at HMRC was a massive thing where traders were complaining about the complexity of the error messaging that was coming back. Using AI and machine learning to basically help with some of those things as well will significantly lower cost, lower the bureaucracy, and speed up trade at the border. And one of the things that people also talk about is that the current software providers don't really at the moment have that focus. They're quite established, and they've got like a very stable software code set, and are not really pressing into some of these like real needs that people have within the freight forwarder and the trade community. So I'd summarize it like that.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, Mark. And exactly the similar kind of, I had approximately 125 meetings with the freight forwarder in the last 3 months or so. It's an insane number of meetings we had, and just to understand what the market is, exactly the same message consistently coming, and this is exactly what we developed in terms of from document management to automation, document automation to integration to rules engine, all the direct integration with the CDS and so on and so forth. But how we can really make life easier. But exactly, I think this is a very consistent kind of message we are hearing from the market. Going back to Lars, how important is trade compliance in this new, especially new environment we are entering?
Well, it is a very good question, because trade compliance for me is the most important thing, and that is what is also actually making all those complications that we heard from Mark happening, right? Because people actually do not have trade compliance because it is complex and complicated, and there will be more changes the next 5 years than we've seen the last 50 in global trade, which is scary in one way, but we can also use that opportunity to change the way we look at things. We need to move away from transaction-based systems that were created 25, 30 years ago. Borders were the border model we are using today. Well, we have been lucky to actually put a better border model in place in some parts of the world, but most of the borders are still designed in the 60s and 70s, where we didn't have access to digitalization, where we didn't have self-assessments in companies on trade compliance and so forth. So for me, trade compliance is the passport for trade in the future. It's going to be the rule of engagement, that what you have to do to be able to trade. You need to be trade compliant. And of course, we see all of these things that were described by Mark earlier before as well when we work with our big customers, right? When we look at the HS classification, yes, a simple code. Sometimes, not always. When we look at companies that comes to us, maybe 70% of the HS classification code of an article register 100,000 articles is right. And then, of course, you not only have complications that cost and drive cost crossing borders and drive the administration, but it also creates huge risk and liability risks for those involved, right? So you might not pay the right tax and customs duties, and you don't. We know from studies that people are overpaying 5 to 6% per year just because of complication. We know that free trade agreements that are there to actually support customs handling in different ways and other ways of import and export as well is only utilized to 60%, which means that there's a huge opportunity for private sector to, first of all, be trade compliant, making sure you have systems in place where you own your own data, where you manage your stakeholders, where you actually have a strategic customs plan, including global HS classification, which is possible today to actually have, to make sure that these 27,000 codes that decides everything at borders, from the customs duty and tax to the regulations and sanctions and restrictions, whatever you have in international customs law and national customs law in the UCC as well. So I think that trade compliance is the big thing. That's what we need to do. And to get there, we also need to have a different approach from governments, right? From customs administration and border administrations on this, because border administrations and customs administrations still work in transaction-based and still working on how to check risk management on a single transaction from traders that comes in with well-known operators every day, have done so for 20 years without any problems, no fault, and still there's a risk management process like we've never been there before, it never happened before. And this needs to change. Use compliance records, use trust-based systems, use the AEO certifications, connect them with each other, connect the players, and those who want to do that can voluntarily do that by show trade compliance, right? Trust is not given, trust is earned. And if you can show that you are earning trust because you have self-assessments, you have digital tools to make sure that you're vetting your stakeholders, your brokers and whoever it is, and you're actually using the already existing systems today, then why are we asking the same data on a traditional customs declaration phase, adding on new data elements all the time, when people actually at borders could know already what's happened all through the supply chain 3 weeks ago in another part of the world, and by that do the selection, do the risk management, do the compliance management already long before it hits our borders. And by that, of course, we can be more efficient at borders. Agencies can be more efficient. It's a win-win. And for private sector, using the systems that are already there, just connecting them. And we are ready. Private sector is ready to submit data voluntarily if there's a benefit of it, if we can share the investment that needs to be there and the gains that comes out of that. So yes, trade compliance is the future. Everybody needs to be trade compliant to get a license to play in global trade 2.0.
Nice. Very good. Especially the way you link the trust and the trade compliance and how important it is. My next question is with Walter. How does the future look like, and what can regulator do to create a level playing field for today and tomorrow's supply chain?
I think I need to confirm what Lars has said. Trade compliance is key. Collaboration between governments and trade is key. And I already referred to the fact that on May 17, the European Commission plans to submit new legislation to the Council and the Parliament. And that legislation introduces a couple of concepts like trust and check traders. In a nutshell, it's a bit super AEO, and a new EU customs data hub. Now, what we've seen from that legislation is that is actually pretty good, but we need to make sure that, as I said before, the legislation is adapted on tomorrow's business reality and uses tomorrow's technology. And I think I'm not speaking only for UPS or myself, I'm speaking for a lot of trade associations in the EU that want to make sure that the results of this new legislation will meet the expectations and the needs of a modern global customs environment for trade. And in our opinion, that can only be obtained through an open exchange between political, administrative, and operational parties. We think that's the only approach that can result in a successful reform, because on the downside, we are still witnessing an existing lack of simplification, uniformity in the application of customs rule. There's no fully electronic environment for the completion of customs formalities in the EU, and these were the original objectives of the UCC that was adapted in 2013. Now, there is a bit of a caveat to this whole positive story of new customs legislation. It could just be true that this will not be fully implemented before 2038. We do not have 15 years. If we take 15 years to do this, we're going to end up in the same situation as we are today. The business reality will have changed, the technology will have changed. So I have to come back to the wise words of Lars. We need to put governments, authorities, and legitimate trade together and look for very enhanced solutions that are based on trust, that are based on the fact that legitimate trade wants to comply with the rules and that the governments want to facilitate trade. That can only be done by using state-of-the-art technology. And to give you an example, because not everything is bad in the European Union, UPS delivered more than 1 billion COVID vaccines through the pandemic. We could only do that efficiently by using our authorized economic operator status, by using our technology, but most importantly, by using the trust that we have from customs authorities. So I think that is the past, the present, and the future.
Great. Thanks a lot. We really running out of time. I really want to take some questions. I'll probably just ask the final thoughts. I mean, if you could probably give us a minute only on that, and just probably take some questions from the audience. And starting from Mark, I mean, any final thoughts? What can be done to overcome the challenges traders are facing, including a few we spoke earlier. And Mark, if you want to just add a little bit on the AI side as well, and I'd probably cover one of the questions as well.
Okay, so I mean, like, if you listen to these two guys, right, who are right in the middle of this, you know, we're working on 1970s policy and technology, transaction by transaction, and the model really focuses on the fact that you're not going to be compliant. So it's a suspicion model, basically. It's completely non-fit for purpose. If you have to wait until 2038 for the next model of this, I think I completely agree with Walter. The game's up, you know, because everything will have moved on so much by that point with the acceleration of technology and everything else. It'll be dead in the water before it even arrives. So I think all of that needs to be, people like Lars and Walter need to keep on pushing at the governments. They need to keep on pushing at the industry to basically adopt these, you know, trade 2.0 type principles. I think it's the only way we're truly going to see trade and volume the borders that people want to see. You know, if I reflect on what we're seeing currently with people, I think in the medium term, I think we've got to do more as software providers to ease some of this bureaucracy and complication, which I think can be done to reduce costs that people are seeing. You know, it seems ironic that we talk about 1970 systems and we're going to talk about machine learning and AI, but I will for a moment. There's been, obviously, I think everybody can see now, there's been an explosion with some of these chatbots and AI and machine learning that's becoming very mainstream. Funnily enough, that's translating across into technology very heavily as well. And you know, some of the things that you can now do are truly useful in this space to alleviate some of that bureaucracy and complication. You know, iCustoms for one are working on a number of different solutions which have machine learning and AI at the heart of what the solutions are doing. So it's not just some pie in the sky kind of thought in the future type experiment anymore. You know, there really is solutions that can be brought to the table which are going to really revolutionize and help reduce the cost and bureaucracy and make people more compliant, hopefully, at the border. So final thoughts.
Oh, great, thanks. I really want to probably, can I just, well, we have only 4 or 5 minutes left. Let me just take some of the questions, if it's all right. I just want to so there's a couple of questions around AI. I believe that's been addressed. There is one question around, let me just say that, more direct to Lars, you. How's the Maersk technology going to interact with UK single trade window?
Yeah, no, thank you. Now we are rebuilding and becoming this integrated trade, everything to be digital, self-service, a lot of opportunities, a lot of connection of different 8-9 different platforms to make it seamless digitally journey for clients, but not only for ourselves, but also to cooperate with you guys, with Walter and his crew and everybody that is involved in the international supply chain. So that, of course, makes it possible to also interact with governments in all these places, including UK government with the systems and the single trade window there, but also with the other single trade windows. Let me just say as final thoughts as well that, you know, we don't have to wait for 2038 for legislation. There's a lot we can do with the legislation we have. So if we look at the trust-based systems that are there, the authorized economic operators that Walter was talking about as well, you know, again, as I said, we've been, you know, helping thousands of companies to become AEO. I've never seen a company, even in the legacy systems of the European Union and United States as examples, that haven't saved money, that hasn't gone better trade compliance, and actually been in different ways, even with low benefits, actually using their AEO certificate in a good way. So if we could increase what are already there on simplifications, already there on possibilities, we could have one customs declaration a year instead of transaction-based thousands every month for those who actually have proven already that they have systems that can be audited online in time by artificial intelligence or other profiling systems and pattern recognition systems. So there's no reason to wait. I was lucky enough to be a part of the Wise Persons Group as well as supporting from private sector on these things. And of course, again, the ecosystem of trust type of setups where we actually use the trade compliance records and the earned compliance liability that some companies are, together with the digital technology we have, are actually already there. And that's how we actually can interact with the single trade windows that makes it possible, but also with other technologies that are there already today.
Sure. Well, thanks, Art. Hopefully, well, I'm sure it answered the questions. I do have a couple of questions again around AI. I believe that's been covered. One question, Mark, you're gonna take it. What the advent of trade digitalization and AI, and what does the role of custom agent looks like in 2028? Oh, between Mark and probably Lars, probably take it as well. The role of
What does a customs agent? You know, I always say the superhero of the future is the customs expert, right? Because describing the complexity we talked about here, you will actually need that competence. But you know, jokes aside, customs is going to be important. Border passages in the new world we live in this global 2.0, 2.0 environment for trade is actually, you know, extremely important. But it's also possible that the tools are already there, the data is already there, and again, of course, the customs agents will also have to change. We will also have to change in our broker industry as well, where these type of service providers will become more going into trade compliance, helping customers to organize that supply chain, helping with customs control towers to make sure that the data is there, that documentation is there by self-assessment and different type of tools. So actually government don't have to collect it on transaction base every time you pass the border, but you can at any time audit it online from wherever you are in the world, basically. And with those type of documentation systems and information systems, which already exists, we could actually take leaps going forward after this seminar. We can start tomorrow. My proposal is that we do.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, thanks for that. Just we ran out of time. I really want to take this question, and I think it's been asked quite a few times to me directly as well. Is will these new AI systems put custom brokers out of business? Who gonna take this one?
No, I don't. I'll take that one to start with. I don't think they will. I really don't think they will. Right. I think what they can do is they can very cleverly augment, you know, the trade flow or the compliance. You know, the things that we're looking at, right? They're not really going to put anybody out of business. This should be complementary to what's going on today, and it is really focused on just improving compliance. I think what Lars is describing in terms of Trade 2.0, right? That's going to be a whole new paradigm in terms of what compliance looks like and who does what, when, and where, right? And that will be a profound change, not just from a policy perspective, but also from everybody else's perspective as well. So that will change the game. But you know, in terms of AI coming and taking everybody's job away in the short term, I don't think that's a reality.
No, if I can add to that, the customs is changing, and also the customs declarant needs to change, and the role of customs is changing very quickly and dramatically. It's getting even more relevant and important for society. We are looking at bringing in the green agenda, deforestation, CBAM, human rights, digital passport. So I don't think that customs declarants need to worry for the moment. They'll still be there in a couple of years.
No, great. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much to all the speakers, Lars, Walter, Mark. It was really informative, I have to say, and how we especially touched the global, the EU and UK and the regulatory and trust and many other things, the technology, AI. So it's sensational. Thanks a lot again to you, and hopefully the attendees really enjoyed this session as well. So we will be sharing the recording. Whoever needs it, please do reach out to us, and I believe there will be some automated system as well. We can send this. But yeah, let's stay in touch. And again, thanks a lot. We'll close this webinar at this point now.
Yeah. I see you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.